I'm MG Kelly. Welcome back for the second hour of the Dynamic Duos, presented by the Mutual Broadcasting System. In this hour, we'll be presenting one of the most popular and most played chart-topping duos of the late 70s, England Dan and John Ford Coley. In 1976, after writing and performing together for more than 10 years, England Dan and John Ford Coley charted their first commercial hit with this song, written by Parker McGee, I'd Really Love to See You Tonight.
Hello, yeah, it's been a while, not much, and I'd really love to see you tonight.
England Dan and John Ford Coley's first hit single, I'd Really Love to See You Tonight. The road to success had been long and hard for these two talented musicians who, like Seals and Crofts, were born and raised in Texas. And the similarities between these two duos doesn't end there, because England Dan Seals is the younger brother of Jimmy Seals of Seals and Crofts. Because of this, they had to use different names. John Ford Coley explains why.
At that time, a lot of people, like Seals and Crofts, Simon and Garfunkel, they were all using their last names. And so Seals and Coley would have been really close to Seals and Crofts, just a little bit too close for comfort. And we wanted something that would stick out a little bit more.
England Dan Seals.
John and I came to Los Angeles. We stayed at my brother's one-bedroom apartment with no furniture. And we sat down on the floor, and Jimmy Seals came up with the name England Dan and John Ford Coley, because we couldn't be confused with Seals and Crofts.
We dropped an L from my name, which was Coley, and we just dropped the Seals from Dan's name and added Ford to my name. Our real names are Danny Wayland Seals and John Edward Coley.
Following the tremendous success of their first hit single, Danny and John went into the studio in Nashville and completed their first album with producer Kyle Lenning. The title cut, Nights Are Forever, another song by Parker McGee, became their second hit single. Writer Parker McGee.
Nights Are Forever was a song, well, I'd Really Love to See You Tonight was more, I think it was Henry Wordsworth said that all good poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotion, which was very much what I'd Really Love to See You Tonight was. Whereas Nights Are Forever was more like a musical crossword puzzle. In my head, I pictured where I wanted to go musically. And I said, I'm going to see if I can get there by putting these different elements to it, because the song really consists primarily of a very soft, almost country-type verse and a very hard rock-type chorus. And I was thinking that would be an interesting sort of interface, if you will.
Lying in bed with the radio on.
Hi, I'm MG Kelly, and this is the Dynamic Duos. England Dan and John Ford Coley grew up in Dallas, Texas. John was trained as a classical pianist, but Dan was exposed at an early age to country and hillbilly music. Dan Seals describes an early musical experience in a family band.
Dad played guitar. Jimmy, he was playing fiddle, and I played the stand-up bass. And we did local TV shows in Midland, Texas, and the Big D Jamboree in Dallas and stuff like that.
Soon, Danny quit the family band to play rock and roll with a group from his high school. It was there in 1965 that he met John Ford Coley, who came in to audition for the group.
We lost a member of the group, and I wanted another guitar player, like the guy that had just quit. And they said, why don't we try a keyboard? And at that time, pianos are real heavy. And this guy showed up at the rehearsal. They said, we got a guy that we're going to sit down and work with and see how it works out. At first, we didn't like each other at all. I guess my preconceived ideas and stuff like that. I wanted a guitarist. But all of a sudden, we started working well together. And the first date we did, we cut a record. That began our big try for the music business through records.
I remember
England Dan and John Ford Coley and Doughty Ferry Road, a song written by Dan Seals. Dan and John continued playing through high school and eventually formed a group called Southwest FOB, which had a few minor regional hits in the late 60s. Tired of the hard rock music that the band was playing, Dan and John began writing songs on their acoustic guitars during breaks and after the show. They quit Southwest FOB and with great expectations set off for Los Angeles with a few songs and a lot of dreams. More of the hits and more of the story when the Dynamic Duos returns after this. Welcome back to the Dynamic Duos. I'm your host, MG Kelly. When Dan Seals and John Ford Coley arrived in Los Angeles in 1970, they knocked on a lot of doors, but they didn't always get the same reception. John Ford Coley explains.
But we'd go into a couple of the companies and play for them, and they'd always be kind of surprised. They liked the sound, but they didn't quite know what to do with it. And I remember one company that we went into said, you know, you guys are great. You are terrific. I love the sound that you've got. However, your music, you know, your songs, we can't use. And we thought, well, okay, at least we got a shot. You know, if we bring back material that you like and we have a deal that says, hey, you bring it back, you got a deal like that. We'd go down the street, another guy would say, I have not heard songs like this in years. These songs are great. You know, you guys, we don't care for it too much, but can we have your songs? And we're both going, wait a minute. You know, the other guy said, wait a minute. Okay, so a couple of people said, why don't you go back home to Texas and work it out? And that's exactly what we did.
From 1978, we'll never have to say goodbye again. When Dan and John returned to Texas, they worked harder on writing and on performing so that when they returned to L.A. in 1972, they were ready. They were signed to A&M Records and had several successful hits in Japan. Then in 1976, their manager Susan Joseph signed them to Big Tree Records, a division of Atlantic Records, and their successful U.S. hits started coming. It's Sad to Belong. Their first single from their second Atlantic album was written by a then unknown songwriter from Nashville, Randy Goodrum. Randy tells us about the song.
I went to a club one time to play a job, and it was at a Knights of Columbus. And I'd never played at a Knights of Columbus. So I pull up to it, and I walk in, there's nobody there, except the guy cleaning up, and it was about 9 p.m., and so I said, gee, this is kind of strange. When are the people going to start showing up? And the guy says, well, there's nothing going to happen here tonight. And I said, well, they told me that there was a Knights of Columbus dance job tonight. And he says, well, you must mean one of the other 4 Knights of Columbuses. And I roar out of there. I tell you, I was really at an emotional peak there. And I said, it's really bad to be at the wrong place at the right time. And I started kicking that around. And next thing I know, I said, now, that's not the way I should write it, but there's something here I could substitute in that expression. I came up with It's Sad to Belong to someone else when the right one comes along. So that kind of takes the mystery out of, perhaps, of how the song came about, but that's the way it happened.
Met you on a springtime day. You reminded me of someone.
It's Sad to Belong, a song by Randy Goodrum, who would later write the classic You Needed Me for Anne Murray. We'll return with England Dan and John Ford Coley as the Dynamic Duos continues. Despite the fact that most all of their successful singles were written by other songwriters, England Dan and John Ford Coley continued to write and record more than 30 of their own songs on their 5 Atlantic albums. They had developed their familiar style by singing together the songs that they had written. And whether or not their own music was selected as the hit was not important. They had become who they were by singing their own songs, and that sound made them the most successful vocal duo of their day.
Morning clouds are gathering around as I stand on the...
Soldier in the Rain by John Ford Coley and Sonny Dalton. In the early 70s, before England Dan and John Ford Coley had established themselves as a major recording act, they toured with several well-known groups, Bread, Chicago, and Carole King, to name a few. But the most influential person they ever worked with, the most helpful individual during the early part of their career, was Elton John.
A group canceled out one night opening for him, so we went, and they sent us up there to open the show for Elton John. And we like to die. I mean, it was, what a break, what what a beautiful break. We played 2 dates, and then he called back 2 weeks later, and he says, I'm going to Europe for a month. He says, I'd like you to come over and do a whole English tour, 18 days in England. So as we said, yes, of course, yes. And he'd come out every night when we were in England, and he would walk out before he ever got clothes on or anything like that. He'd say, I found these boys, they're from Texas. I found them in America, and I brought them over here to share the bill with me. And he says, England Dan and John Ford Coley. And he would introduce us every night.
More with England Dan and John Ford Coley when we return. This is MG Kelly. Welcome back to the Dynamic Duos. In 1979, Dan Seals and John Ford Coley got together to record what was to be their last album project as a duo. When they were selecting material for the album, they came across a song that had been written and recorded previously by rock singer Todd Rundgren. The song was called Love is the Answer. England Dan and John Ford Coley, like Seals and Crofts, had also become followers of the Baha'i faith. This song, with its theme of universal brotherhood and understanding, expressed their own feelings and beliefs. John Ford Coley explains.
I love the song because it had a tremendous amount of dignity to it. And we said, let's do it, because it really represents what I feel, what I want to express. It's just one of those songs that'll go on forever. It's a classic.
A classic, Love is the Answer, England Dan and John Ford Coley. Following the success of Love is the Answer, Dan and John got together in January of 1980 to begin work on a new album project. Dan Seals explains what happened.
And when we came together to choose the material for the next album, it became apparent that the directions that we were going in were a lot different. It became apparent that we wanted to do different things. It was difficult coming to the decision, but we wrote it out. It was a tremendous upheaval emotionally, but the Greatest Hits album was out, and it was a befitting so-called end to the way we'd been doing things. And so it was time to start fresh and new.
When it's over, no one needs to tell you, you already know. When it's over and the feeling's gone, it begins to show. You can't live in the past, so you must go on. But the need's still there, so you gotta be strong. When it's over, really over, let go. When the love's gone, why go on pretending when you know it's so? It's just an old song that you can't revive, but it's all you know. You can't live in the past, so you must go on. The need's still there, so you gotta be strong. When it's over, really over, let go.
One of the last songs written by England Dan and John Ford Coley, When It's Over, performed by Dan Seals. We'll be back with the latest from Dan Seals and John Ford Coley right after this. This is MG Kelly. Since the breakup of England Dan and John Ford Coley in 1980, Dan and John have been recording individually. Dan, who is now performing as a solo act, has recorded 2 albums for Atlantic Records. His newest album, Harbinger, includes his latest single, Can't Get You Out of My Mind.
Remembering the day that I left you, thought it would be easy to forget you. Wash you away from my memories. Doesn't matter what I do, can't help myself from thinking of you. And no, I just can't get you out of
longtime friend and manager of England Dan and John Ford Coley, Susan Joseph.
England Dan and John Ford Coley is one of the most played acts, even today, on the radio. They very much made their mark on the music industry for the kind of duo they were. Very mass appeal. Any relationship that lasts that long, there is a portion of you that grows apart and that really craves individual creativity. And when you reach that point, it is a hard decision, but it's a very important thing to go your own way and develop what you feel inside is necessary to satisfy your own potential.
John Ford Coley is now writing and performing with a new group called Leslie, Kelly, and John Ford Coley. Leslie and Kelly Balkin, longtime friends and former background singers with Dan and John, have been working with John on their own material long before the breakup of England Dan and John Ford Coley. With Leslie on lead vocal, this is their song, Without You.
One day long ago, was it a dream? You let me know you really cared. Was I lost in another world and I saw you smile at me, looking over the silver sea? Destiny, you brought you closer to me. Destiny, I hope that we will meet again. I saw you sail away, led to the ancient sea. Took my head and walked away, sorry for me. Then I thought I heard your voice calling to me somewhere. You said, love isn't love until you have it to share. Without you, is that the way it's meant to be? Without you, all I see is a memory. Without you, think of the times that you were here with me. Suddenly, silently I take all my destiny. You were here with me. You are my destiny. You and me are destiny, destiny. You and me meant to be. You and me are destiny, destiny. You and me meant to be. You and me.
Leslie, Kelly, and John Ford Coley, Without You. Though Dan and John are pursuing their individual careers now, we asked John if they would ever be recording together again.
Danny and I are very, very good friends still to this day. And, you never know what's going to happen in the future. Everybody always says, or they always think when some kind of a breakup occurs, that somebody did something to the other person, and now you're angry, and that's it, and you'll never work with one another again. That's not true at all with Danny and I. You don't sever a relationship of 16 years and just say, that's it.
England Dan and John Ford Coley, together or apart, they will always be remembered as one of the great vocal duos of the 70s.